Who's coming along to Underground in February? It's New Zealand's most exciting festival of soil, food and farming, and it's once again back at Greystone Wines in North Canterbury. Looking at how things are shaping up, it's definitely going to be an epic couple of days out that you don't want to miss. There's going to be interactive talks on soil health, adaptive grazing, agroforestry and farm planning, plus music, glamping, field walks, and just some incredible food. Honestly, it's a festival for people who like to get excited about topsoil and a really good grazing wedge. This year's speakers include John Chester from The Biggest Little Farm, the man, the myth, the legend, Darren Doherty, and an epic lineup of local legends like Russ and Charlotte Heal, Jodie Roebuck, Nick Gill, John King, and Jules Matthews, plus much more. I'm going to be hosting some talks on the economics of regen transition and ecosystem payments, and as always, helping out with the infield soil sessions. So, Underground Festival is on the 18th and 19th of February 2026, and you can purchase 1 or 2 day tickets that are now live up on undergroundfestival.co.nz. Hopefully, I'll see you there.
When everyone's losing, that's when everyone starts working together. It's a classic case of, everyone has to pull together because of one thing, and that one thing is usually, we're not making any money, what are we going to do together? But when everyone's at a high, they're like, that'll be all right.
Welcome back to another episode of the Force of Nature podcast. Today's special guest is Mid-Canterbury Arable farmer Thomas Holmes, who's also a Kellogg Rural Scholar and a member of the MPI on-farm support team here in Canterbury. In today's episode, I discuss his Kellogg report around opportunities and the challenges facing the future of arable farming in Canterbury. This is a big topic at the moment in New Zealand, as arable farming is doing it tough and a number of farms are looking at changing land use. So for today's episode, we look at what inspired Thomas to undertake his research in this field, what challenges the arable industry is facing at the moment, and the possible opportunities for the arable industry going forward. So without further ado, let's get into it. How are you today, Thomas?
I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you. So first of all, Thomas, can you paint a picture of Canterbury's arable sector today and what makes it unique domestically but also globally?
So I guess at the moment, the sector is very much at a crossroads. There's quite a lot of change going with land use change, but what makes us quite unique in Canterbury and probably the wider New Zealand as well is we produce a lot of partial seeds, and that's quite unique probably domestically because we are very pasture focused. Globally speaking, there's only 3 or 4 countries in the world that are like us, but I think that probably the unique thing for us is we are mostly domestic focused over export. Don't know exact figure, I'd say nearly 60-40. It's definitely more domestic focused. We're exporting just partial seeds, your herbs and your vegetable seeds is a big thing in Canterbury. Whereas globally, a lot of it's exported between countries, and we're not, we're in the middle of the Pacific, and we don't have a country that close apart from Australia, which we do a lot of trading with, but a large portion of it goes to Europe. So it's very unique, I think, in a global sense, as we know. And that creates, both opportunities but challenges, I think, being so domestically focused. We are very open to what's happening globally, but domestically speaking, it's, depending on what the markets are happening in the other sectors, really determines what happens for us on farm. So there's a lot of variability every year, which makes planning and that sort of thing quite challenging. So you've got to be very on the pulse of what's going on with other sectors, not just your own sector.
Yeah, and I think people underestimate how complex arable systems are in New Zealand just because you are so at the whim of what the other markets are doing and what that influences on what you're going to actually plant each year. And then you've got to wait for it all to grow. So it must be a very interesting but also can be quite frustrating industry to be part of because you can't plan for as well.
I think it is challenging, and I think that's where you can have as much complexity in your system as you want. Like, I know guys that have up to 20 crops in their rotation, or you can have 5 or 3, like a probably traditional UK kind of rotation. And it all depends on what you want to do, but I mean, simplicity does help. And I think in my mind, it's diversification is where as an arable system is really important, because it's the whole putting your eggs in one basket situation that I think if you're just focusing on growing crops, then you're a little bit in trouble because you're just so focused on not one particular market, but one industry, which is a risk with global trade and even just domestic trade, and all depending on what's happening with the milk price or the or the meat prices, and that determines a lot of things for us. So I think it is frustrating. I think it's a really dynamic system. And in Canterbury in particular, we've got a lot of opportunities to diversify from away from arable, but also just diversification in your system to have that ability to be able to flex when you need to is really important going forward.
Yeah, and it's going to be really good today to dive into both those challenges of the industry, but also those opportunities, because you've recently done the Kellogg program, and your report is titled "The Opportunities and Challenges for the Future of Arable Farming in Canterbury," which is quite topical at the moment. I've got a few farmers that I work with that are looking at changing land use to dairy due to these challenges. So, in your report, you talk about the sector's individualistic mindset. Why do you think collaboration is particularly challenging for the sector?
I think what makes Arable very unique in that respect is we are competing for contracts. So I guess how it works is you're more or less growing certain things, whether it's your wheat, your barley, your ryegrass, your clovers, herb seeds. The pastoral seeds are really contestable depending on what's happening in the global market. I guess in the last probably 5 years there's been, well, even probably longer, there's been a real glut in the market because of oversupply. So there's a real challenge knowing how much area of grass seed you're going to put in for the year, or if you're going to get the clover contract. Because we're such a small industry, we're very competitive individually, against your neighbour or guys in your grower groups. Like, we're all competing for contracts to get something to grow, which makes this challenging and quite hostile in some respects. I mean, we're all fairly, there's definitely some collaboration, but I think when you boil it down, we are so individually focused on what we're doing on our business. We're not actually thinking about, I guess, the bigger picture of the industry and where we can actually have some wins. But I think it is really hard. I guess the industry has drastically increased the last 25 years, and we've now got some core growers, and I think there will be more that will leave with retirement and land use change. But it comes down to, there's the seed companies. There's a dynamic between the seed companies and growers that isn't particularly healthy sometimes because of the markets and the way things are. When I think a lot of forecasting will be quite helpful for the industry to know what's going on globally, especially with climate change and other countries that are growing the exact same crops as us, knowing what's happening in their seasons. And we do get updates and snippets, but if you could get a little bit more of a prediction, that gives you a bit more certainty of, okay, I'm going to put in or earmark 45 hectares of grass and or clover, or because you can pivot and put a pasture paddock in, but that's still timing. Like, it's still, you can go rip it up tomorrow, but it's that I like that planning ahead, because the reality is it's nice knowing where your income comes from. And I think that's where, I guess, the dairy sector looks fantastic in that respect, because you're getting a milk check every month. You don't have to worry about supply, you don't have to worry about demand, because somebody else is doing it all for you. And as an individual farmer in the arable sector, you're controlling where, not so much your seed contracts are growing, because that's the companies that you're growing for job, but it's you're trading grain, or you're trading straw, or you're trading silage, or you're trading your winter feed. Like, you're responsible for that, no one else. You can put the onus on like a stock agent or a trader, but you're the one making the decision. So I think that's really where it boils down to, is you're the individual farmer. And I think collectively as an industry, we need to look a little bit more at pooling resources and pooling and getting some buyer groups and that sort of thing, because the price of things aren't getting any cheaper, and we're not getting any more for our product. And we're probably at our peak of for some of our seed crops especially, I don't think they're going to be willing to pay any more. So we're at the point where we have to start thinking differently. What can we do? It comes down to inputs and also our cost structure, and where can we actually make some wins, because we need to drop some costs somewhere without diminishing our returns. So it's a real conundrum, I think. And yeah, Canterbury's unique because we've got water, which is also an issue and an opportunity, because it's created a lot of reliability, but also I think we're nearly too reliant on it now. Whereas you look at the dryland farmers now, and a lot of them are going to convert or get out of it, but you kind of farm with nature, not against it really, because you're trying to manipulate it really with your irrigator, and that gets you in a hole. And I think there's quite a few people in a very expensive hole with expensive water and expensive metal structures that, as we know recently, are very prone to wind. So yeah, it's a bit scary out there, I think, at the moment. And I think that's where there needs to be more collaboration, but I've got plenty of solutions. But whether the industry is going to do it, I would say it's a hard thing to change behaviour, especially in industries that are very dare I say, old school mentality, because they don't want to change. They don't think the system's broken because there's such a degree of variation of people saying the profitability's still there, and you're like, I don't know. I don't think numbers are going to change that much between different farmers. I think it's just down to how much debt people are in, and that has a massive stress in the system, I think, and creates the need for looking at different crops, looking at different options, because you need this water to pay, and I don't know if cropping in itself will pay that water off. We can't double our yields. We can't actually grow any more necessarily with what we've got. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, well, I think, you've really highlighted a lot of the issues, but also there's the opportunity around that collaboration. And I mean, I do work with quite a few arable farmers, and they have to bring in things like winter grazing just to pay for the water. So then that allows them to run the system that they do have. Before we dive in a bit deeper about these challenges and opportunities, do you want to give everyone a bit of a background on who you are?
Yep, absolutely. So I guess I'm a fifth generational mixed cropping farmer in Methven. Your family's been here for coming up 150 years. So the farms, I guess, changed a lot in that 150 years. It's downscaled from, I think we're around, I think it was 4,000 acres to now around 600. So I guess where we are is quite an interesting place. It's probably the original cropping area of Canterbury, but we don't actually necessarily need water or need a lot of water to actually do what we do. But it's we have our own challenges with too much water. Probably it's a lot later season here, and it's a fantastic place to live. I'm pretty biased, but I guess for me, I've always been farming here and overseas, done a various degree of different jobs from organic cropping to robotic milking in Canada, large scale arable, and then arable at the home farm. So and a bit of beef finishing when I was over in the UK, arable. So I've got quite a diverse background, and now working off farm, obviously, at the moment. And it gives you quite a unique perspective on things. I've got a lot of interests. Arable's definitely at the core, but you've got to, like I said previously, you need to have not your egg in one basket. And I think that's why, I like the beef, I like the dairy, I tolerate the sheep. they have their moments. And obviously, and horticulture is definitely an interest, and it's a growing sector in Canterbury. So I guess for me, very, very degree. Yeah, and obviously I've done Kellogg's and was a Lincoln grad about 10 years ago. It's the Ag Sci. So that's me in a nutshell, really. Quite diverse.
Yeah, no, you're a bit like me, like a bit of diversity in what you do. It keeps everything pretty interesting. What inspired you to do the Kellogg program in the first place?
I guess for me, I've always wanted to, I like challenging myself, and I think the Kellogg's program was a perfect opportunity with, being in the job that I'm in. I've got a little bit more flexibility than being on farm, and I thought, well, it's a great opportunity to take it. And I guess for me, looking for my career, I was looking at what's happening with the arable sector right now. I've got an opportunity to really dig into it. I'm not on the day-to-day. I'm going to pick it apart and see where things are actually at, because you can hear it. You hear a lot of things, you read a lot of things, but you've really got to dig into it to actually see what's actually the causation of things, and where. For me, I wanted to find a silver lining, and try to be optimistic, which is pretty hard. But I think there's definitely some opportunities, and that may not be arable. I think that's probably the message is it's not going to be just arable. I think we've got to actually look beyond it to survive, and it's probably a harsh truth for a lot of people to hear that. But until prices improve, I think we have to look beyond arable and look, and I think there's a lot of mixed arable systems out there. It's just going beyond even that, where there are opportunities.
Yeah, I guess that's probably a thing to highlight, is that arable farming and mixed arable farming in Canterbury is on the plains it's kind of been a feature for such a long period of time, and there's a lot of farms like yourself that have been around for 150 years of family, so it's hard for people to change their systems, I think. Well, they don't want to be, but they also don't want to be the one to lose their farm. So I think the timing at the moment to do your report is it couldn't be more spot on, particularly with the ability to change the dairy at the moment. But what was probably your biggest surprise from your research that you did?
I think for me it was actually a lot of growers are looking out of arable. Mm-hmm. And that was, opportunities. They see opportunities out of arable. I guess for me, I was like, these guys are not going to be very open to change. They're not really open to looking at new things. So I was a little bit, I wasn't gobsmacked necessarily, but it's probably a lot of them are looking at hort options, whether it's berry fruit or potentially apples when it becomes available. I mean, a lot of them were hyping up plant proteins, thinking that was going to really pay the bills. And even just looking at, where they can actually add, whether it's even going into vegetable production, which I think, that's already happening. There's a lot of things already happening in Canterbury. And if you like plants, you like plants. And there's plenty of guys that I talked to there's a few of them that didn't have sheep or cattle, that just didn't want animals. And I was like, that's fair enough. I don't blame you. They're stressful, but, they're also rewarding. But it's, horses for courses, and people need to do what they want to do for their system. You can't go and tell them what to do. But there's definitely people that have looked at a lot of different things. And I think that's really, that was quite a shock. But kind of refreshing to know that there's actually people looking beyond what are we doing at the moment. Because ultimately, going forward, risk mitigation is a big thing. Cash flow is a massive issue in Arable because you're waiting a long time for any money to come in, sometimes 2 or 3 seasons, depending on the contract. And that makes things difficult to plan and have a business that flows. So, that was probably the biggest thing for me.
Yeah, I think it's such a surprise to me that how arable farmers almost get used a little bit like a bank with some of these contracts where they don't get paid for 2 or 3 seasons. Can you explain to someone who might not be familiar with why that is the case?
I guess that's probably an extreme response, but
yeah.
I guess the way the contracts have worked traditionally is grow the contract. Well, you grow grass, for example. You put it in March, then most people will harvest it come January, February. You get one. I think you get 3 installments across the year, and I mean you could get paid out for grass by the following December, but that's when the next harvest is happening. So it's quite a long, drawn out process. I know one seed company does installments through the year when they're growing the crop, which I think is fantastic because I think that a lot of the reason people have stock on the farm is because they need cash flow. They don't necessarily love stock, just the dairy side of it. Like a lot of arable guys seem to be anti-dairy cows on their farm, and rightfully or wrongfully, that's their opinion. But it provides something that arable doesn't give, and that's cash. Grain trading is a little bit better because you can you sell it in autumn, you sell it in spring. If there's a drought, you can go flick it to that particular region, depending on how far away it is. So there is options, but I think for those specialty seeds and I'm not sure about the vegetable seed side of it because I don't grow vegetable seeds, but it's generally in lump payments, which I find bizarre. I'm like, why would you not just pay it monthly like everyone else? I just don't really understand agriculture in some respects because everyone else gets a bill every month and we have to pay it. Why can it not be split in 12? It would be better for cash flow. It may not necessarily be more profitable, but at least you know that you've got something coming in and you're not writing overdrafts. So it's I think that's where there is some systematic change that needs to happen. And I know of things globally that are people basically paying for grain that's already in the silo. As soon as it's in the silo, it's already paid for. Like you already you've got some money sitting there as you sell it off. Like you're getting money already in there. Because some people will hold grain for 2 years because the price isn't good enough, and they're like, oh, I'm going to buy it. I'm like, yeah, good luck. Because the one thing I've known is that a lot of farmers don't budge on price, and it's the classic case at the moment. We've got one of the highest milk payout in history, and we're still sitting at 550 per feed wheat, which doesn't actually get influenced by the dairy price. The feed barley is about 520. But the reality is that I would argue that it needs to be well and truly in the 6, let alone high 6s to 700. But who's going to pay that? And that's my argument. Is like it needs to be at that price. When everyone's doing well, when other guys are doing well, everyone should do well. Yeah. When everyone's on the low point, you help each other out because it's just a classic case of I think the community thing is definitely decreased. Farming communities are strong, but I know particular communities of various farming groups are really strong, particularly in the sheep and beef sector from what I can see. And it's like, when everyone's losing, that's when everyone starts working together. It's a classic case of, everyone has to pull together because of one thing, and that one thing is usually, oh, we're not making any money, what are we going to do together? But when everyone's at a high, they're like, oh, well, that'll be all right. I think that's the problem. I think that's the fundamental issue is, we focus on the positives, obviously, when things are high, but not everyone's at a high. The plant sector at the moment, generally speaking, like your vegetable sector, your arable, Your viticulture is struggling.
Mm.
Kiwi fruit's fantastic. Apples and pears are doing really well. Cherries look like they're going to have a good season. All stone fruit looks like it's going to have a good season so far. But it's just, I think the problem is we're just so focused on the positives that we kind of forget that there's always other sectors that probably need the most support, but naturally focus where money goes, unfortunately. And I think that's where I probably get personally frustrated is like these, there's a lot of guys struggling out there, and they need a lot of, they need to be able to change something. And I think that's, it's good at this present time with the way things are going. They might be able to have a bit more flexibility in the system to do what they want to do, or be able to do something just a little bit different, because ultimately they need to be able to have that chance to change and that actual choice to change to be able to survive. Like, it doesn't matter what they're going to change to, it's actually just getting that flexibility in their system, which I think is, for any system, I think is important. I think we don't want to become, I guess, like a bit like the American system where it's very monocultural, because that's when you get into real issues. And that's, that's not a great mindset either, I don't think.
No, and I think there's something to that around that mindset. Like, if you know you've got the opportunity to be able to change, you will start looking for what opportunities there are out there for you and your farm system as well, which creates, I guess, a different way or a different approach to how you approach your farm each day, which is really important for just that mental health of the rural communities.
I think so, yeah.
So one of your real key themes, obviously, throughout your report is around that low profitability, but also the rising input costs. So you mentioned about it before that we're getting paid pretty well for a lot of our seeds, and we're also getting pretty good yields in terms of what we're doing. We're probably one of the world leaders in terms of yields in our crops. Why are our arable margins under such pressure today, more so than they've ever really been in the past?
I think the biggest thing is the input costs. Like, you've got, I guess, for an arable farmer, your main costs are going to be your fert, your chemistry, you've got water, that's expensive, and then labour, I would say, and maybe machinery running costs, or buying new machinery is probably a bit of an issue. I think because we're on the bottom end of the world, we get a little bit shafted in that respect, because we have to import a lot of things. And because of the systems we're in, I guess I can only speak for Canterbury, but with the irrigation, you've gone from having yields of 7 or 8 tonne on a good year to 13 or 14 or 15 or 16 in places in Canterbury because of water. When you feed something more, it grows more. You need to feed it more. So you're like a vicious cycle of, you need more nutrients, you need more fertilizer. Because the plant's healthier or growing more, it's more susceptible to disease. So you got to build more chemistry. So you're going from a very low cost system in dry land, where the margins are pretty actually similar to irrigated crop on a good year, to a system where you need to continuously push it with things to keep it healthy. Rightly or wrongly, is it the right thing to do? I'm probably not the one to answer that. But because we have to import a lot of things, everything's expensive. Like bringing in chemistry, bringing in fertilizer, like we're so reliant on global trade for that respect. And I guess for me that gives us it's a real issue for us, because we're so far away. Whereas the likes of like the UK or in the States or even Australia, they make a lot of their own too. Like, obviously there's a new fertilizer company in New Zealand that's been around for the last year. It's disrupted the market and tried pushing the prices down, which is fantastic. But I think it's more it's a band-aid approach than actually the core issue. I think the core issue is, and I think the likes of these programs of like A Lot of Touch, which is a MPI funded program looking at how can we actually decrease our chemistry and actually use biologicals and more of an IPM type approach, which I think that's kind of a long time coming. But I think that's where we kind of need to go to actually look at some of these costs. I mean, fertilizer is a hard one to drop. I think unless you have a very solid soil fertility plan, and you're testing regularly, you're looking at your mineralizable N, you're looking at your potential mineralizable N, and you're doing your sap tests, you're doing your leaf tests, you're doing everything right. Because if you need to tweak it, not rely on previous management, I think. Chemistry, I think, is a hard one depending where you are. Depending on your disease pressure, what varieties you're using. But it's also probably education, I think. Like, do you actually need it? No, probably not. It's a preventative. Like if the aphid thresholds aren't that high, do we need an insecticide? Probably not. Like, it's just that kind of mindset change. I think like we're always going to get fungus issues or bacterial issues when it's wet. It's a classic example. My dad was spraying over the weekend. Like, there was a risk of bacterial blight, the ryegrass he was out there spraying. just because if you had that, you lose your seed yield by I don't know how much, but it's pretty significant. So it's that whole system is so focused on chemistry, which I think when it comes down to it, it's probably written down to actually the biology of what's going on. And I think for the arable sector, they probably know a little bit more about biology in some respects, but it's still the reliance of what we're doing. We're so set in our system, which is a bit concerning with a lot of other issues coming forward with like chemical resistance and that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it's our biggest challenge is probably our prices of what we're paying for inputs and how we actually decrease that. Like in my memory, I can remember urea being $400 a ton. It's now 1,000 at the moment. So like the $600 difference, and we're not getting any more for our grain. So the only thing it's doing is chewing our margin. So I think I think it's a wider sector issue because we're so focused on profitability of these big corporates that are farmer owned, which rightfully or wrongfully is probably the worst thing for the industry, I think, because we're not getting actually the best price for the product we need. And then, rightfully or wrongfully, is fertilizer needed for grain crops? I would say yes. And there's guys obviously growing grass that aren't using it, which is fine because that's what they did 40 years ago, and we had no issues with grass production. But I think a little bit helps, but it's not. Yeah, you can't really tell somebody what to do really on their farm system, and I don't think arable farmers oversupply because it's too expensive. So I think it's where, like, precision ag is really important. But yeah, it's a tough one to be when you're a price taker, and I guess I've rattled my brain a few times to figure out how we're going to be price makers and actually get out of that curve. But yeah, it's a quite an interesting one. We'll probably talk about that later as well.
Yeah, well, what have you come up with on the kind of shifting that model from being so much a price taker? Is it around like a cooperative group coming together of farmers? Is that, you spoke about that a bit earlier?
Yeah, I think for me, looking at it from like the input and chemistry side of it, is actually grower groups coming together in smaller groups. I mean, co-op's probably the wrong word, but it's kind of just using those groups that you're in, like your discussion groups or your mates, and looking at, well, if we all using pretty similar chemistry or basically the same fertilizer, why are we not buying together in bulk and trying to get a bulk discount? It might be $100, $50 a ton. $50 a ton, still $50 a ton. I think going forward, it's that, as well as in machinery pooling, because I think that is one of our biggest issues in the sector is we all need our own combine, we all need our own tractor, we all need our own cultivation kit. Rightfully or wrongfully, I don't know if we do, but especially in the smaller area guys, like it's just, you got all this machinery that's just sitting there for most of the year doing not much. It's bewilders me. My numbers brain says why. My heart says I like it, but it's I like wheels, I like tractors, but some of the prices are pretty they've gone off the roof.
Yeah.
With inflation.
The cost of a harvester now compared to what it was 5 or 6 years ago is phenomenal, isn't it?
Yeah, and like we've never owned this brand new one, but I mean $1 million for a combine is absolutely ridiculous. Yeah, I think there's things like that is where I think would work. I think with these different grower groups of particular crops, I think co-ops could work if we could actually work together and actually form industry groups. And the guys in Southland do with the oats. Some of them supply Harroways, some of them supply the oat milk companies. And I think with the way things are, obviously you've got contracts with various crops, but there's no reason why there shouldn't be a grain co-op in every town of mainly arable growers. Why are they not pulling their grain and distributing it across the dairy sector and the poultry and the pig sector and actually sitting down and saying, well, this is what the price we have, we want a fair price, this is what we have. If you don't want it, well, go elsewhere. But I mean, the challenge is you can import grain from Australia for cheaper. But I mean, it's all down to your carbon miles, and you've got to look about. I mean, I guess for me, in my mind, you've got to look after your community, and not everyone can be a dairy farmer or a pig farmer or a chicken farmer just because of what they like to do. So I think that boils it down to where we can actually make some solutions. Is actually, I've lived in places where there is co-ops and they trade everything in a co-op. And people these days don't like co-op. Well, they don't like the word of co-op, but I think it's actually getting that fair price for everyone. Because, I mean, the reality is you're always going to be worse off from the worst guy, but at least you're getting a secure price, not gambling. And it's, I think for the way things are, how reactive the industry is at the moment with everything going on, it gives you some security going forward. And I think that's where, the likes of get like your consultants and that are running these discussion groups or industry bodies that are running discussion groups need to seriously start looking into some models, because I think how are we going to carry on the way we're going if the price is not going to increase? And that's that's an issue for a lot of these crops, and obviously people want New Zealand growing grains and things, but it's what does that actually mean for the industry and for the individual farmer is what I question.
I've actually had an interesting conversation with one of my farmers who's a dairy farmer, and he buys his grain from 5k's down the road. But in his emissions profile through Fonterra, it's still the same as someone in Wairarapa or Taranaki who imports it from somewhere else in the country. So he's like, I should actually get a benefit for just getting it from my local farmer. And he's like, I'd rather pay him 600 plus a tonne because I'm going to get rewarded on the emissions side of that, and I'm also supporting my local community. So that's quite an interesting driver. He'd rather support someone local than import from somewhere else, but he's getting no difference for that from like the carbon side when it's just coming literally just down the road from him.
I would argue the calculations are wrong. I mean, it's fairly obvious that, like, yes, you're doing bulk shipping from Australia, but based on the miles of literally going off, 5 down the road is not very long.
No, it's not.
In a truck. I mean, he could probably go there in his tractor and trailer and grab it.
Exactly, yeah.
And that's, it bewilders me. But I think that's where work, there is work being done in that respect. Yeah. And I think, and I think it's, like, obviously it comes down to individual choice. But, I mean, you look at what dairy's done for this country, rightfully or wrongfully, and you look at the communities it has built and supported other industries, and horse the same. Like, there's those two industries have probably shaped New Zealand quite dramatically. Mm-hmm. From the agricultural side of things, we're the two most successful companies in New Zealand, and globally speaking anyway. And it's, we've got to look at the bigger picture, and I think people just forget when they're like, I'm going to buy PK, or I'm going to buy, because it's cheap. And I'm like, just adding fat to your system, that's all it does. It just keeps conditioned on, that's all. Like, it just nothing for your milk. There's nothing for your quality. Grain, don't get me wrong, I think grain's great, and I think it has its place, but it's not just grain. Like, I think as a human being, we're looking at mixed diets. We need a mixed diet. Why can't a cow have a mixed diet? Why does it have to eat just grass? Grass is great. It doesn't look very nutritious from my point of view, but obviously they like it, and that's fine. But, like, every other cow in the world eats more than just, in the indoor systems, eat so much more than just grass. There's a lot of different things, and I think that's probably where that's another opportunity for the arable sector. It's like, well, if you're not going to grow something with grain because the grain's market's average or seed market's average, why don't you just grow some silage or whole crop or something? Because it's just growing a plant, you're just not going to harvest it. It's going to go through a chopper. But it's still same. It's a mindset change.
Yeah, and I think that around that cow one is really important. Like, most people don't realise that just grass doesn't balance the whole rumen, depending on where it is in the season. And there's so much value to be bringing in things like grains, and obviously different grains have different protein levels, so it's all about tailoring that. But if you talk to a ruminant nutrition, getting that rumen to fire is really important to have that mixed partial ration, and that also drops the methane. It also drops the nitrogen coming out the back of the cow and in their pee. So there's huge value to it, and it normally ends up in the vat as well. So that's a conversation I think needs to be had more on the dairy level, and that will also see more value hopefully return to our cropping farmers too.
Yeah, and I think that's I'm all for growing grass, but I think there needs to be more than just grass, because they just focus on it's the cheapest feed, and cheapest feed doesn't mean it's the best thing for you.
No, and it doesn't mean it's good quality grass either.
No, depending on the season, it's average. Like spring and early summer, great. Rest of the year, I would probably say no. But depending on where you are, autumn's definitely hit and miss. I would not say the quality declines pretty rapidly, especially around here. So it's I like challenging the narrative, as you can tell. Yeah. But it gets you in troubles in certain places. But you've got to hold your own at times, and I think it's getting more messaging across, I think, is really important.
Yeah, I think it's just important to have different views and narratives, and everyone actually have an open conversation about it, because this is how we solve a lot of these issues. So in your report, you identified like a few opportunities, and you already mentioned horticulture, vegetable seed production, increasing that, and plant proteins. Is there was there anything that really stuck out as the most realistic opportunity for your arable farmers?
I think for me, like obviously there's guys that already do veggie seeds in Canterbury, and I had a mixed view whether they're actually profitable or not. So depending on who you talk to, I guess from the risk factor, from the profitability, like obviously carrots is really profitable. Like you can get 10,000 a hectare for it on a good year, or you can get zero. So like it's the neighbour's grown it, and I've seen it, and I'm like, well, you grow carrots here. We have the most wettest harvests in places, but people just do it, and a large portion of the carrots are now grown around Wanaka because there's a real sweet microclimate for it there. So yeah, I don't see vegetable seeds as being like the saving grace in my mind. I mean, it's good options, and there is definitely some good options in places, and I think there's some good crops you can grow. But it's all like anything in arable. It's a gamble whether it's going to be a good yield or a bad yield. And I guess for me, plant proteins. I guess from my experience, from what I've heard, it sounds really good, but at this stage, I don't think they're willing to pay any more than what you would get for a traditional plant contract. So for a seed, so to be actually a viable option, it needs to be more. Like growers need to get a good margin to even consider it. I guess for me, hort I think is the most promising. Looking at the growth potential of hort in New Zealand, I think it's fantastic. I mean, there was talk 25 years ago of Canterbury being the hort centre of New Zealand. We had apples around Christchurch. Yeah, whether apple's the right thing, I don't know. I mean, in places where they are getting built at the moment, it's a good place because you're low frost, or you got some frosts, good wind cover, don't get snow, obviously, in those places. On the coast, not often anywhere. So the risk factor is pretty low. I mean, whether, globally speaking, like blueberries is growing exponentially. Could they be our next export market? Why not? We've got the climate. A lot of it's been undercover, but between some growers, why couldn't you? I mean, I think the berry fruit thing will be potentially a big, massive thing. At the moment, kiwi fruit is not an option. I think it's probably looking at later into the century is when we could probably put it in. I mean, it's in Nelson, so it will trickle down. Obviously, it's a high risk, high reward, but you look at, and it's expensive to get into, which is a big thing. But I think that comes down to opportunity for a collaboration with a group of growers, whether it be a dairy farmer and an arable farmer, doesn't matter who, farmer groups. Why would you not? I mean, the biggest challenge, or biggest kind of, I guess, risk going forward in the sector as a whole is looking at all these corporates taking on massive land holdings. Where the farmers, they're getting retired, or they're selling out to corporates, and then these small family farms and smaller farmers. Where's the opportunities for them to pull together? I mean, you've got growers that have got very good growing expertise. If you can grow a plant, generally speaking, you can grow probably any plant if you understand that. Where's the opportunity there? And I think hort is probably the biggest one in Canterbury. And just looking at its growth every year, on the amount of area it's on as well, is exponential. I think it will surpass dairy in the next 45 years. Just looking at its growth, looking at the land area, and I mean, it's not just kiwi fruit. There is other crops that we could probably grow, and I think it's actually looking at, well, we've got a lot of fantastic area. Why are we not growing citrus? There's areas in New Zealand we can grow citrus. There's areas that can grow stone fruit. Collectively, it's a fantastic industry. Very diverse, brings a lot of people into the industry, brings a lot of people, I guess, jobs. You need a lot more people actually out in the orchards than you do on a dairy farm. And there's also opportunities for transferring labour across the sectors when there's peak time. Like, you've got so many people migrate to New Zealand, and also I would argue probably New Zealanders that need to get and work. But the problem is a lot of these jobs are minimum wage, and people don't want to work for $25 an hour anymore. They want to work for $50. But you're not going to get $50 picking fruit. But it's fantastic for students or unis or, and all those, and people that are, part-time or looking at those sort of opportunities are fantastic if we can get it down here. And it will grow, and companies that are down here will create, pack houses and the likes of it. And it may have to be a multi-use pack house, not just for, there's definitely some opportunities between your processed veggies and your fruits, depending on the markets. If you've got a grain storage facility, you could always put potatoes in. It's just, if you're a floor, obviously. So yeah, there's opportunities everywhere, I think, when you actually start looking at it. But it's just creating the systems that work for people and allowing a template for people to actually play with. Because I think yeah, that's probably the biggest challenge, is actually changing their mindset and saying, look, well, there's actually opportunities here for pooling resources, pooling experiences, pooling knowledge, and create some actually new industries for the area. And I mean, like, why would you not? But at the moment, we're so focused on dairy, which, rightfully or wrongly, is paying right now. But from the arable perspective, there's a few that are converting. I don't know the number. I've heard, I hear grapevine numbers, and it is concerning, I think. And I don't think the industry is actually really taking it seriously yet, to be honest, because it should really be a warning sign, I could imagine. It's the second round of conversions. So, like, dare I say that, what's next, really? That's what I kind of challenge the industry, like, what's going to happen next? Because you've got another big round of conversion, that's retirement. There's a lot of people in the industry that's 60 plus to run on the farm, and you think, where's your son? Where's your daughter? Why are they not even interested? And that's probably a bigger challenge.
Yeah.
Who's going to buy these farms that are 2.5% return on investment compared to your 10% that dairy's doing at the moment? Fairly obvious answer for most people. If they want to go farming, it's not going to go arable farming. So I guess that's the challenge I see.
No, that is a huge challenge. And like you said, I think in your report, it was like originally there was 1,200 odd decent sized arable farms. Now we're down to 500. So, it could halve again with this next round if things were to emulate what has already happened.
Yeah, and I think so. I mean, look, if you've got the opportunity to, I guess my argument is why wouldn't you? You don't necessarily have to always do dairy. Like, you can convert back tomorrow. You could put grain in. Like, there's no issues where you can't still grow feed. And like anything, it's not set in concrete. A lot of these dairy farms that need replacing in the next 10 years, is it worth putting a new shed on it? Because it'd be good arable dirt. It's had organic matter built up over the last 25 years. It'd be fantastic for arable. But then, if it can grow grass, it can grow grass. So I guess, it's definitely, I think, a warning sign. But I mean, whether people are taking it seriously, I don't know. From the conversations I'm having, I think they are. And it's like, well, how do you change that? How do you change the narrative? Like, the return on investment needs to be double, let alone staying the same way. But I think land use goes in cycles. When you look at New Zealand's history, we had a big boom. Arable was really good in the 1930s to 1950s, and then you got obviously your wool boom, dairy. What's going to be the next one? I would say hort.
Yeah.
And then who knows? Could be fisheries. I'm not saying we're all going to be fish farmers, but who knows? Like, the reality is, you just don't know. I think it's easy to speculate, but my money is on hort being the biggest opportunity for Canterbury, but also New Zealand, I think, just from what I could see. But country.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on the recently released NZ Grown Grains Mark? Do you think that will help the industry?
I think for the awareness piece, 100%. I think it's fantastic that we've got a grain mark, and I guess I'm surprised we haven't had one yet, to be honest. I think it's probably should have been quite a long time ago. I know marketing and that sort of stuff is expensive, but I think people in New Zealand generally want to know where their food's from, especially in the foodie places in New Zealand. Like, you look at your Hawke's Bay, you look at Canterbury's pretty foodie, Otago's quite a foodie sort of area, Nelson. A lot of those places are very food orientated places. I guess my challenge, or probably my cynical view of things, is it gonna drill down to the grower? I mean, there's talk of 40 cents more of a paying for bread. Like, I was in the grocery store yesterday. For your ploughmans, you're paying like $4.50. Somebody going to pay $5 for a loaf of bread? My argument is probably not. I mean, inflation's obviously pushing these prices up, but the margin that the grocery store gets is still the same. But it's not. It never goes down to the grower. Never gets any more. And I guess I worked it out one day with the 40 cents increase and a grower getting 8 to 10%, 10 cents more. It worked out to be about $150 more a tonne, based on how many loaves of bread you can make out of a tonne of wheat to actually get that value. So, like, on top of, at the moment, milling wheat, I think milling wheat is about $500. I mean, $650, $700. Will the mills pay for that unless they get the value? My question is no. My honest answer is I think no. I don't think they will. I think they'll go for the cheapest option they can because they're running a business, and a lot of them are probably struggling too. But I think there's a certain point. Like, obviously, inflation's something you can't really try to regulate it, but it's just creeping up, and I think I'm 100% behind the mark, and I think it's fantastic that you can say this is grain from New Zealand in your product. But my question, I think, for the everyday New Zealander, like, are you going to go for $4.50 or are you going to go for two? I mean, the bread at $2 is pretty average, but it all depends on your budget. Like, I think that's the kind of the hidden cost in New Zealand is like everyday Kiwis are struggling, so we're not going to pay more for our staples, are we? Unless you really like bread. I mean, I like a good loaf of bread and I support it, but I know where it comes from. So like, I'm very certain that I know where it comes from. Not necessarily the individual farmer, but like I know where it's come from like it's come from Canterbury or it's come from, I know where things are grown. But not everyone, the general New Zealander doesn't know that. And I think that from that side of things, that Mark is really good educational wise. But I would challenge their thinking in regards to thinking they're going to get more money out of it. Because I mean, I don't think bread's a commodity necessarily, but you look at the value add from just creating, like milling a grain into flour and how much more money they get out of flour. Crazy money just for making flour. But it's, I think for value add for New Zealand, we need to be looking at what we can do from a product perspective and actually shipping these overseas. And saying this is from New Zealand grown grain or New Zealand grown flax or New Zealand grown oilseed, and supporting some of these companies that are actually doing that already and pushing them. And I think growers need to support that. And I don't know how that would work in practice, but like, I mean, if you're growing a certain crop for a certain company that's making products, why are you not involved in that business? Why are you not getting into the supply chain? And I don't think growers necessarily want to be in the supply chain, but if you look at any product globally, the money is in the middle, and also the best margin is probably in the middle, but most of the margin is actually within 5k of the store. And obviously supermarkets get a lot of money. They have the potential to obviously push prices up. They have the power that I don't understand how they can do that, because they're playing devil's advocate really. I look at it at the local Foursquare here, like they push price up every time I'm in there, and just see they're pushing the electronic tag reader and pushing the prices up every day. Like it's just like for 20 cents, or for but it's margin. It's all down to margin. So it's it's a systematic change that needs to change. But you could have a whole conversation on that and how on how it needs to change, but also how it needs to be shortened, and actually people need to value where their food comes from, because if the way things are going, like food's going to get more and more expensive with climate change and yield failures and cost production for farmers. They're not getting any more for their product, but the guys that are selling it want more money to keep them in business. So it's not a New Zealand issue either, and I think that's where the scary part is, that people don't really understand. It's not even New Zealand. We're expensive because we live in the middle of nowhere, rightfully or wrongfully, and we export most of our good stuff, which gets a premium or supposed premium overseas to pay, bring back money back to New Zealand. But most of the money in New Zealand gets circulated. I think it's about 25% export and 75% is just circulated through the communities. So there's an issue there. I think the 75%, not the 25%. We're trying to bring new money. We're trying to bring money into New Zealand.
Yeah,
it's not the. I mean, obviously when everyone calls out, when you look after the guys domestically, and like all the discarded stuff or not discarded, is probably the wrong word, but the stuff that looks funny or comes to our supermarkets. I mean, it still tastes the same. Doesn't matter about how it looks, but I mean, it'd be great to be able to support the communities and have. I mean, I've lived in communities where they grew basically veggie boxes and things like that. When I was in Canada, and like you just pay a certain amount, and you get veggies every week. Like farmers are starting to do that now with meat boxes and stuff like that. And obviously, it's pretty similar prices to the supermarket, but it's going directly to the guy that's actually doing it. He's putting the hard yakka in. He deserves the payment. Like, he's not on six-figure income necessarily. Like, he's just trying to get by. And I think it needs to go back to a lot more of that, because it essentially goes to supermarkets and packaged and then sold for ridiculous money with no real actual value being created. But I guess that's going to have to be a systematic change too. So it all comes down to actually how you change these people's mindsets, because we're losing land every day to housing and other things. How do you support the guys that are out there growing the vegetables, growing your grains, growing your beef? Obviously milk's milk. But I think that's where, as a New Zealander, we've got to question what maybe buy local, and then have that curious mind of, what are you doing? Like, how do you grow it? Have a bit of transparency. And I guess in the plant sector's probably got the transparency might dampen a few things, because obviously there's a lot of things that are growing plants that aren't probably that great. And when you open that can of worms, it's quite scary. But it's having that transparency, I think, like, saying this is what I'm growing, this is what you need to put this on because of this. Buy my product if you want to, rightfully or wrongfully. I think there's some opportunities there, but it's how do you create that across the sector, not just individually? Because I think a lot of these value-added products are great for an individual farmer or a couple of farmers, but when you've got 1,000 or 500 of them in Canterbury that need to do something different, they're going to have to do 500 different things to actually make some money. So it's it's a challenge, I think. But there's definitely there's some guys doing different things, like milling grains, for example, and having them, not, I don't think spray free necessarily, but low sprays and that sort of stuff, and selling direct to millers. So yeah, there is definitely things happening, but it needs to be by the masses, really.
Yeah, absolutely.
And something exportable, because we're too small here to actually, I think the value's overseas, and that's just the nature of the beast, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that is one of the issues here. Is like it's great to have all these value-add products that we're selling locally in the market here as farmers, but we do have that limited population, and that just limits how many people can actually make a lot of money out of that. So it's almost you need two food systems. You need one that's focused on the export, but you also need one that's sending that really high quality, telling that story to the local customer, why they should support the farmer rather than the supermarket, and the way in which they grow their food, and they can vote with their dollars based on that, and the farmers will adapt and change as required. So yeah, I think that's a really key point you've raised there. I think off the back of this is succession is going to be pretty tough for the arable industry, as you've already said. Like, the returns aren't great. The land's worth quite a lot, particularly in Canterbury. Why do you think it's so much harder, or why do you think it's going to be so much harder for the arable industry than, say, other agricultural ones?
I think it comes down to, I guess, for the arable sector in particular, like, you've got to have a lot of upfront cost in your machinery and infrastructure. Like, if you're lucky enough to be grown up on a farm and from a farm, then you've got a little bit of a step in. But there's still the issue of wealth. Like, it's very hard to split 2.5% on a good year. There's not a lot to it. I mean, I guess it's the same thing with the sheep and beef sector. Like, there's not a lot of actual wealth. I mean, there's obviously share farming agreements with, like, your stock, and then the landowner gets like a pay cut, I suppose, out of it. But a lot of those guys have a lot of scale. They have a lot of animals. On a good year, they would work. On a bad year, it'd be pretty tough. Whereas the dairy sector is fantastic in the respect that you've got, your contract milkers, you've got your share milkers, which is probably a little bit more rare, but and there's also like equity partners or equity managers. So like there's always opportunities to be able to create wealth while you're working, whether that's, owning some stock and then, the farm leasing the cows back, or you're building up some beefies and then flicking them off, or that sort of thing. I think in the arable sector, when things are so tight, you've got to bring your own machinery in. If you're going to share farming, for example, like having just a general farm, you'd have probably 3 or 4 tractors, all your cultivation equipment. May or may not need a combine necessarily, but you'd have your own sprayer, you'd have potentially your own fetch spray. You could get away with just getting contractors into that. Cultivators, you can get contractors in, your own drill. So like, it's not like a cheap exercise. And I guess the problem with the cash flow issue is you're going in there writing overdrafts straight away. Like, you're not necessarily, you got to wait for your crops to mature and then harvest and sell. I mean, a mixed farming's a bit more different. You could buy lambs and things like that, but you're still writing a fairly high overdraft unless you're going into a successful business that is low debt and has a lot of, dare I say, sweat capital or retained earnings. So it's not necessarily like unprofitable, but there's not that many of those in Canterbury, I can imagine, with arable, just because of generational debt, but also irrigation, and then replacing the machinery costs has probably outweighed what we get for our products. Like, is it worth it? Probably not. You might as well just keep on repairing your old machinery. I don't think it's worth buying a brand new one unless you're contracting out and doing, like, being a contractor as well. Yeah, so I think that's the biggest challenge, is there's such a massive upfront cost. And unless you're contracting, if you're contracting, sure, that's fine, but not everyone can be a contractor either. Like, I see it here locally, there's a lot of competition between contractors just doing work. So like, it is a fairly competitive market, and I don't know if the margins in it necessarily either. So like, it's it really needs to get to the point where return on investment is double to actually make it justifiable to put yourself in that situation. Or just manage. I mean, you could be a manager of a farm, and I think, you could own a little bit of stock, but I think it's where, like, is it worth actually owning machinery? Probably not. Not to begin with, anyway. Like, you gotta lease or use contract as much as you can, and run a lot of stock to make some money for the first couple of years. And I think it's going to be the biggest challenge. And then obviously with succession, with the families that have kids that don't want to farm, which is fine, that's their choice. What happens to these farms? They get bought out by other small and medium-sized farmers, or they get bought out by the bigger guys, like your Pies, your Turleys, your Houstons, those sort of big growers that are got a massive holding already, and then we're kind of down to a lot of very small growers that just kind of fighting to survive. So I guess that's the challenge I see, and that's where I guess the co-op model would work, and pooling your machinery, pooling your costs, any joint venture. You'd be like, well, why don't we build something together, like your grain storage or processing for veggies, or buying a spud run, or going into a venture where you all pool the equity or whatever to buy land and buy orchards or something different, or even a dairy farm. Why is there not 10 growers just going out and pulling together? Like, yes, it's complicated because you don't want to be on the board meeting because 10 farmers are pretty opinionated, but the reality is, like, it's getting to that point where you need to look like that, because there's not that many people apart from dairy farmers that actually have an excess cash to be able to go buy a dairy farm or convert, or because round figure you'd be looking at probably $6 million just to convert.
Yeah,
which is not cheap, and depending on what happens with the payout in the next 18 months, could be a really hard time. So, and that's what there's a lot of consents out there at the moment, and it's they're climbing. I don't know the number at the moment. I heard a month or two ago it was like 20 odd. So, like, they're actually going to convert. I mean, there's plenty of people that are just wanting the option, which I think is very smart strategically. Whether they get it across the line will be the next thing. I think that's where the complexity gets. But like I said, I think it's getting to the point where people need to be like, well, yes, I'm an arable farmer and I love growing crops, but I also have a dairy farm, or I have a horticultural or interest in or I have an interest in a commercial business or a business in town. Like, why does it matter? If you've got that ability to be able to grow, I think it's, and the sheep and beef industry is a prime example. Like, you look at how many of them have got agritourism, they've got hunting, they've got fishing, they've got Airbnbs, camping, all that sort of stuff. And that's not farm income, is it? But it's it's actually keeping their farming going and enable them to actually do what they love to do, and that's growing beef, growing lambs. So I think it's just that kind of Kiwi ingenuity / innovation that probably needs to be drilled back in, or actually pushed, because you're kind of like a mouse on one of those wheels, really, at the moment. I hate saying that, but it's true.
it is. Yeah. So if we look at, say, the next 10 years from an arable farmer's perspective, on your research, what would you kind of be the 3 focus priorities for these farmers?
Oh, it's a tough one. I think the pretty key thing is looking at your costs, and where we can actually get some efficiencies. I think the collaboration piece is the big thing. If you can pull together, then we can save some costs there. It's looking at actually what can we do on your individual farm to change something, whether that be bringing in dairy heifers, bringing in cows, bringing in a different diversification option. Could be hort. It's just looking ahead of arable, because at the moment it's pretty hazy, and I think we have to be realistic on the fact that we need to be looking beyond it. I think precision ag has a massive part to play in all of these efficiencies. I mean, at the moment, the guys that have GPS, fantastic. There's a lot of things like robotics. You got your robotic sprayers, you got your robotic tractors that drive machinery, do your drilling, do everything at a precision. You've got AI spot spraying where they're cutting their chemical costs by 50 to 90%, depending on what it is. Like, all those things are going to help, and I think that's where we need to decrease what we're doing in the chemical space. I mean, it's part of the system. It doesn't necessarily be the main part. I think it's kind of it's very drilled in as a precaution, not necessarily a necessity, just because you're being so preventative, because you don't want that disease, because you have that disease and you kind of go backwards. But it's those 2 things I think are really important, and then probably looking at succession differently. I think that's probably a fair one. At the moment it's tough, but I think it's looking at how can you bring in diversification to allow the next generation to come on. And that may not be even a farming enterprise. It could be completely commercial. It could be a business. It could be, it could be a new farming venture. So like it's looking at outside the box because we're going to have to, because it's not getting any better from a profitability standpoint. So we need to look at things differently in that respect.
Awesome. Very poignant points. So I finish up all my podcasts with a question for everyone, and it's basically, what is a force of nature to you?
Well, for me, looking from what I've seen you do, I think it's just looking at things holistically. You've got a knack of actually talking to people and actually getting out what they're thinking and where they want to head with their business, and actually just focusing on being a little more holistic than, dare I say, reactive, which is most of the industry at the moment. It's pretty reactive. I mean, a force of nature seems like something you don't want to fight against either, which sounds pretty ominous, but it's good. I think it's all about balance. I think we're probably out of balance, and I think what you do is trying to bring that balance back into farming systems, which I think is fantastic. So I appreciate what you do.
Thank you. I think you've really, throughout this conversation, you've actually spoke about that a lot as well. So it's obviously a way that you think about your farm system, but also the industry, because they're obviously not separate things. So it's cool to see that's how you're thinking about solving this problem as well. It's not just the parts, it's how do they all come together. And I think that's going to be really key for our arable industry going forward. So really appreciate your time today. If someone wants to get in touch with you to talk more about your report or just some ideas around the arable industry, what's the best way to get in touch?
Probably LinkedIn.
Yep.
I'm on LinkedIn. Just search my name up. It's fairly common name, but it should come up with either connection, or as long as it says Canterbury, New Zealand, you'll be fine. Picture of me out in the crops. So it's happy to discuss anything really arable related or Kellogg's related, because it's a fantastic course, and it certainly opens your eyes to want to do more, and even do a nuffield when I have the time, which won't be for a while yet, but that's okay. We'll focus on farming, I think, and children. So yes.
No, I'm sure you'll be definitely lining up for a nuffield one day. There'll probably be never a good time to do it, but it's a lot of work in it. But I'm sure you'll be a great candidate, especially with all the work you're already doing, trying to lead the arable industry. So thank you very much for your time today, Thomas. I really appreciate it. Something, I think, a conversation that we need to have more of within the industry about what's happening here in the arable and supporting them.
I think so. No, thank you very much.
Cheers. Thank you.
All right. See you later.